The first recorded history of Gants is in about 1200, as they moved from Flanders, present-day Belgium, into England. Over the years, there were several different spellings of the name. It seems to have originated as Gant, G-H-A-U-N-T, which means gloves, and it is assumed that they were glove makers. History also indicates that the early Gants were especially skilled in weaving wool, and may have brought this talent to England with them. Through the next 6 centuries, Gants were born, died, fought, they created, they divided, and they begat gents with J's and gents with G's. But mostly, they persevered, and in 1638, Thomas Richard Gent caught a ship to America. And that's where our story begins. Thomas Richard Gent arrived in America in 1638. We know he settled in Charles County, Virginia, and was a farmer and owned livestock. Although many of the records of Charles County were destroyed by fire, the ones that remain indicate that he married twice and had children, although their names aren't listed in the rolls. It is suspected that Thomas shared the property with his fellow immigrant families, which included surnames of Simmons, Laniers, Passmores, Jennings, and Maties. The parcel of land on which they lived had been granted by the British government to Roger Davis for transporting the families to the new land, a common practice as the British endeavored to colonize New England. English documents show that the Davis and Gant families had long been connected and possibly shared some common ancestry, so they were at the very least family friends. There is no indication of the size of this patch of land, but it was not unusual for these grants to be as large as several hundred acres. Plenty of room for the new homesteaders to sprawl out. Likely, Roger Davis in turn deeded some of the land to the individual families, keeping some for himself, but the records with these details were burned in the Charles County fire. Thomas Richard Gent died in 1698. The Gent and Washington families had also been long acquaintances. It is unclear exactly the nature of their relationship, but it seems that John Washington of Surrey, Virginia, may have sponsored the trip for his friends brought over by Davis. Richard Washington continued the family friendship, and history notes his acquaintance with Thomas's son, John. Because repeated documents list John and Thomas with the Washingtons, the likelihood that they were indeed father and son is enough for historians to safely make the assumption. John Gent was born in 1667 in Charles County, Virginia. Further reason to speculate, with near certainty, that he was the son of Thomas Richard Gent. However, it is impossible to know this for sure, as that birth record was destroyed by fire. John Gent didn't stay on the farm. By the time of Thomas Gent's death, John had palled up with longtime family friend and wealthy entrepreneur Richard Washington. John was listed as a paid servant, although it is likely he was paid in tangible goods such as livestock and staples. John Gent and Richard Washington were travelers, and one document puts them together in Barbados. John Gent slowly acquired a small amount of wealth in the form of livestock and decided to settle down. He married in 1712, and he and his new wife began their family. Then, in 1717, it happened. John Gent purchased 300 acres of land in Isle of Wight, Virginia, from Richard Washington for the uncommon price of 4,000 pounds of pork, with Sampson Lanier, Richard's son-in-law, as his attorney for the sale. With that transaction, the Gants became landowners in colonial America. He would enjoy the land that he worked so hard to earn for another 11 years. In 1728, at age 61, John Gent passed away. He and the woman historians simply call Mama had 6 children, 5 boys and 1 girl. In his will, he bequeathed the 300 acres of land, paid for in sweat and pork, to 2 of his sons, the youngest and oldest, Thomas, likely named after John's father, and John, his own namesake. Oddly enough, the youngest son's name is later historically recorded as John Gant. Although many records were taken and recorded very accurately and with care, some very common mistakes were made in history simply by an inadvertent error in transcription. Now, John Gant's youngest son has made what seems to be a purposeful decision to change the spelling of the name by one letter, replacing the E with an A, and changing even the phonetic sound of the name. Was he escaping the name Gent, or was he restoring it to its rightful sound? In the earliest records, the surname was spelled Gant, which in Old English might sound like Gant. Much more Ganty than Genty. John Gant was an educated man and may have arrived at this conclusion and made this conscious decision to change the spelling of the last name to reflect its intended pronunciation. John Gant would live a long life. He was a farmer and owned livestock, which he marked with a crop and slit in the left ear. But mostly he was into real estate. He would marry twice, first to Anne Brantley of Granville, North Carolina. It was with this marriage that he left Isle of Wight, selling off the 150 acres he had inherited, as well as his brother's 150 acres that he had acquired. The Brantley family was wealthy, and the young Gant, at a mere 24, probably very sure of himself, assumed he had married into money and would never have a care in the world. To make a new mark, John decided they would move to Choco, North Carolina, and they did, leaving the land behind but retaining ownership. Things did go well with the Brantleys, and he and Anne had 5 boys and very likely didn't worry for much. With his in-laws' political influence, he was granted a parcel of 150 acres in Choco. 4 years later, he was granted another parcel of land, 150 acres, but he sold it within a month. Then, in 1744, at age 30, he finally sold off the 300 acres that his father had worked so hard to get. 8 years later, John and Anne were divorced, and the simple life was over. John married a woman with the surname Bobo, and the two of them would have 2 more children, Charles and Louis. John went on to buy and sell more land, the last deal to his son William, 300 acres for 40 pounds. John and his new wife were noted in the rent rolls of Culpeper County, Virginia in 1764. It was during this time that John is listed on the muster roll of the Granville County Militia along with his sons John Jr., William, and Isham. They served in a regiment under Colonel William Eaton. In 1778, as a result of the Revolutionary War, it is noted that John declared his allegiance to his home colony of Butte, North Carolina. John died in 1783 at the age of 70 in Franklin County, North Carolina. Louis Bobo Gant was born in 1757 in Butte, North Carolina. Like his father, John, Louis was an educated man and an entrepreneur, although much of his business still revolved around agriculture. In 1783, he was married to Mary Armstrong of South Carolina. We're privileged to have access to the original marriage certificate, which is actually much more of a contract. In fact, in the late 1700s, marriages were still mostly arranged, and that the family of an eligible bride would seek out a suitable man, usually wealthy, and in the same social class. Mary Armstrong was agreed upon to wed for 300 pounds.
Know all men by these present that we, William Gant and John Thompson, of the state of North Carolina and county of Lincoln, are held and firmly bound unto the Honorable Governor Alexander Martin the full sum of 300 pounds, no pence, for payment with truly to be made and done. We bind ourselves and heirs jointly, and firmly by these presents, sealed with our seals, noted this 10th day of January. The condition of the above obligation is such that, whereas that Louis Gant both this day also obtained a license to be solemnized between him and Mary Armstrong. And if it shall appear at any future time that there is no just cause to obstruct the said marriage, then the above obligation to be void. Signed, Thomas White, in the presence of William Gant and John Thompson.
Louis and Mary would move to Bedford County, Tennessee. At their Shelbyville plantation home, they would continue to have and raise a total of 11 children. and the work on the farm heftily supported by 25 slaves and another 10 hired hands according to the 1830 census. Louis Bobo Gant would see 4 of his children die in just the 5 years leading up to his own death in 1837 at the age of 80. Among his surviving children was a son, Jesse Bobo Gant, who would carry on this line of descendants. Jesse Bobo Gant was born to Louis and Mary Gant in 1794 in South Carolina, before the family moved to Tennessee. Jesse was the 5th child and the 3rd boy. There are no records to indicate how he spent his time growing up, although census information does place him at home in the years leading up to his marriage to Rachel Kaiser of Bedford County, Tennessee in 1817. By the 1840 census, they had moved to Hardin County, Tennessee, and had 12 children and owned 5 slaves. In 1844, they would have 1 more child, a boy named Robert, bringing the total to 13. Jesse Bobo Gant continued the legacy of educated Gants, assuring that each of his children were schooled, and in his last 20 years of life, Jesse himself served on the Hardin County School Board. He died at a young age of 52, just over a year after his wife, Rachel. Andrew Jackson Gant was born on July 22, 1828 in Hardin County, Tennessee, to Jesse and Rachel Gant. He was the 7th of 13 children. He married Elizabeth Ann Harbor in 1848. She was probably known as Betsy Ann. He is listed in the 1850 census as a farmer, with 2 children and a property value of $1,200. In 2013 money, that's roughly $33,000. But land was far less valuable, so that translates to somewhere around 120 acres. The census record of 1850 did not list slaves, so it is unknown if he had any, but he likely did not. By 1860, Andrew and Betsy Ann had 5 children, and things were going all right on the Gant farm, but the nation was becoming more and more tumultuous in the days leading to the war between the states. On November 1st, 1862, Andrew Jackson Gant was put on the muster roll to appear for service January 1st, 1863. He would serve with the 2nd Company G in the 1st Regiment of the Confederate Cavalry. After 10 months of service, he was missing and reported absent without leave. By the next muster on December 31st, 1863, he was reported as a deserter. However, he had not deserted. He had been captured and transported to Columbus, Kentucky, and then moved to Rock Island, Illinois. Rock Island was the main prisoner of war camp for captured Confederate soldiers. It was not completed when the first soldiers arrived, and in the first month the population had soared to over 5,000. There was minimal food and supplies, raw sewage flowed, and disease was rampant. Over 2,000 guards and prisoners died at Rock Island, most from disease and exposure. After housing over 12,400 Confederate soldiers, the prison was destroyed, the captive soldiers freed, in July of 1865. One of Andrew Gant's grandchildren recalls a story his father, Elisha Gant, told him about the day Andrew Gant came home.
My father, Elisha Daniel Gant, was born in Hardin County, Tennessee in 1856. He was the son of Andrew Jackson Gant. He grew up during the Civil War. His father, A.J. Gant, was captured and was taken to a prison in Illinois. The guerrilla band that captured him and his brother Bob and 2 other men put them on a steamboat going down the Tennessee River. They stopped at an island, took the other men off, and shot them dead. The captain on the boat knew my grandfather and his brother, and that was the reason they wasn't killed. Grandma heard about the men being killed and thought her husband had been killed. She did not know until the war was over that they was kept prisoner for 16 months on short rations. After peace was declared, he was set free. My father was 8 or 9 years old at the time, playing in the yard when he heard his mother shouting. And there was his daddy, home safe. Otis Gant, 1968.
Andrew and Betsy had another child after he returned home from war, Andrew Jackson Jr. He was also called Bud. That brought their total to 6, Sometime after the dust had settled from the war and the children were grown, Andrew and Betsy Ann moved to Texas, where they would live until Andrew died in 1899 at age 70. James Bobo Gant was born in October of 1859 in Hardin County, Tennessee, and he would stay in Hardin County all his life. Jim, as he was also known, married Ruth Tennessee Bishop on January 13, 1880. Together they would have 6 children: William Andrew, Lily Tennessee, Elisha James, Ray S., Ruby M., and Aubrey. Jim passed away in 1910 at age 48. William Andrew Gant was the firstborn of James and Ruth's 6 kids. He arrived on November 20th, 1880. At age 18, he married Mamie Shutt on October 11th, 1899, and they lived in Hardin County, Tennessee, and started their family there. By 1920, they had pulled up stakes and headed south to the promised land that is Alcorn County, Mississippi. In 1936, on December 17th, at age 53, Mamie passed away, leaving William Andrew a widower. He wasn't to be alone, however. Still listed with him in the 1940 census is William and Jewel, and a very young William O. and Margaret V. William Andrew Gant would pass away on December 5th, 1956, at age 76. He and Mamie are buried together in Biggersville, Mississippi, at the New Hope Presbyterian Church Cemetery. They had 6 children: Elby, Ruth, Burl, Lily, Charlie, and Willie. Those children have had descendants who've had grandchildren and great-grandchildren. All in all, the Gant line is so much more expansive than Thomas Richard could have ever imagined it would be in the early years of 1638.